What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Against the Current podcast. My name is Rudy Garcia, and we have a very awesome special episode planned for today. Today, we're going to be talking with a personal friend of mine. He's a pastor. He's a students director, a leader, a husband, a father, and he's been a good friend, one of the best friends that I've ever had in my life. He's been there with me in some of the hardest times of my life. Today we're going to be talking to Jonathan Cruz. He goes to our church. He's the student director at Elevate Church, and we're going to talk to him today about students, this next generation, Generation Z, and what can previous generations do to effectively pour into the next generation, disciple them, and empower them to be leaders for Christ. Yes, in the future, but to be the church now, where they are now. But before we get into that, very quickly, remember that we have the three journals: the journal, the prayer journal, and the fitness battle plan to help you in your journey to be effective providers, protectors, and priests. We also have Forged by Fire. If you love fantasy, if you've always loved the entertainment and the value found in fantasy stories, but you're a Christian and you love and honor the Lord, you know that the fantasy genre right now isn't lining up with those views. So go ahead and pick up Forged by Fire for the book reader, the book lover in your family. All the links are available in the description below. Last but not least, we got our sponsor, our amazing sponsor, Regenerate Coffee. If you guys love coffee, this is some of the best coffee we've had ever. It's locally roasted, it is organic, and it helps support a discipleship ministry, Regenerate Movement. So if you love the Lord and want to help support discipleship, and you love coffee and want to enjoy coffee, organic, locally roasted coffee, go ahead and check out Regenerate Coffee. The link for that is down below. Use ATCPOD 10 to get 10% off and help support us and what we're doing here in the podcast. We love you guys. Hope you guys enjoy. Peace out. How you doing, bro?
What's up, Rudy?
You doing good?
I'm doing well, man. How are you guys doing today?
Good, bro. Let me ask you a question. Do you know about like the 30 different kids in the youth group and the students group that want to start a podcast?
I have heard about it. A couple of students have come up to me to talk to me about that.
Starting a podcast?
Yeah, they want to start an Elevate Students podcast.
Oh yeah.
How do you feel about the concept of getting your sermon scrutinized on a weekly basis on a podcast?
Man,
Literally the following week.
It's great. It's great, but at the same time, you got to take it with a grain of salt.
Bro, we're so happy to have you. Guys, welcome back to the Against the Current podcast. My name is Rudy Garcia, and
Yo, I'm Gordo.
it's Gordo. How you guys doing? Today, we have a very special episode, as you can already see. We have a guest, and this guest is more than a guest. He's like family. Guys, give a warm welcome to Jonathan Cruz.
What's up, guys?
He is a very quick introduction. He is a some people would call him pastor. He wouldn't yet
Yeah, not yet.
because
Almost there.
factually he is the students director at our church, Elevate Church. But I've considered him a friend, a mentor, a brother, a leader for 12 years now.
Man, I think about 14.
14 years.
Roughly, yeah.
That's a long time to know somebody, but he has been, over the 14 years, one of, if not the most consistent and most valuable friend that I have had over the years. He's been there for me in times where, I've needed it. And I'm just happy to have him here. He's been doing this leadership role at Elevate for how many years now?
Hey, brother, I would say so. I started coming to Elevate Church back in September 2016.
Yeah.
And from there, I started serving students, and I took the role of student leadership roughly around spring of 2020,
Spring of 2020.
which is the best time to do it.
I was about to say, it's the best time to go into it. You know what I remember? I remember you preaching at students a little bit before
Correct.
you took on that leadership role. And then right around when you took it, couple weeks, maybe months.
Couple months, yeah.
Well, COVID happened.
Yes.
And for the majority of the beginning of your tenure, you were preaching off like Instagram TV or whatever that was back in the day.
Yeah. It was a challenge, man.
Yeah, I remember
It was
you
crazy.
sitting in the dining room,
Correct.
and then what was it? You guys would pre-record the worship.
Yeah, actually, Hugo showed me some videos from that time.
Yeah.
He was showing me how like each person would send in their individual video, and so they would have to do the whole set by themselves. If they messed up anything, they had to restart it completely over because everything had to sync up at the end.
Yeah.
Like every individual video.
Yeah.
So they would have to play their part alone without
Yeah.
hearing the other person.
Yeah, it was just from a click, a metronome
Yeah.
that they would have to go off of.
Listen,
Yeah, like they'd be on the last song, and they'd just mess up. And just,
they had to restart the whole thing.
yeah.
They couldn't just like start the.
No, they all had to be perfectly in sync.
Listen, if it does anything, it definitely increases your skill.
Correct.
It made them better musicians for sure, and I think it made you a better communicator. You didn't have you couldn't rely on feeding off of a crowd.
Correct.
You really just had to become confident in what you were saying,
Yeah.
and what the Lord gave you to say. What about now? How is students looking like now? Like what does a Friday look like for Elevate students?
Man, so students on Fridays is an amazing blessing. I always tell our students, I tell the staff, I tell the church entirely, I believe I have the best job at Elevate Church. I love Pastor Lewis's role, Pastor Dan, Pastor Jerry, Pastor Hector, and the rest of our staff. But I feel like I'm the one that can be the goofiest and get away with it. I could be the funniest and get away with it just because it's kind of like, it's something that is expected out of a youth director. And, students has been a phenomenal blessing, getting to pour into the next generation of students. Has been something that I've been passionate about since I first answered the call back in 2006 when I was 16 years old. And it's something that I believe God has planted me and purposed me to pursue after.
Yeah.
So it's been great. I love our team. Our team is amazing, from Connect to Refuel, from worship to tech, security to social media, photography to events, games to merch. All of our team members are phenomenal volunteers and just greatly appreciative, because without them, honestly, Fridays wouldn't be what it is right now. Students are students. They're great. They're gonna test your patience and at times your love for ministry. But I'm telling you right now, it's something that is so worth it. Yeah. And I tell this to students. My favorite days. I mean, it's Sunday. It's always gonna be Sunday, but I really love Fridays. I love Fridays. I love being able to hang out with them, connect with them, pray with them, open up the Word of God with them, worship with them. It's something that it's just if I had to wrap it up in one word, man, it's awesome.
Awesome. So if you're in the area, Miami Lakes, South Florida area, and you don't have a home church, and you're between the grades of 6th grade,
6th to 12th grade, yes.
6th to 12th grade. Listen, you have somewhere you can be on a Friday night at 7. You have a youth director that cares for you and loves you. You have a team that appreciates you, and not just that. Like you say a lot, you have a church that understands that the next generation is the next generation, but they're also the church right now.
Correct. Absolutely.
So a church that values you even as a young person. Family. You have. Talk to me about your family a little bit.
Yeah, so I have an amazing wife. We've been married next week is going to be 9 years. March 22nd will be 9 official years. So we're grateful for that. I'm grateful for her. She is my helping hand. She is amazing. She's a huge blessing in my life and in our family's life. I have 2 beautiful girls. The oldest one, she's 6 years old. Her name is Juliana. You guys see her running around every Friday. She as much as we love to be around students, she loves to be around students. And our youngest one, her name is Juliet. She is a year, about 3 to 4 months, and she's just a bundle of joy, man. So they're it's a blessing to be a husband, to be a father. I understand the weight that carries, but at the same time, we have a God that we can lean on with that weight. So the biggest blessing that I have is them supporting our students' ministry.
Yeah.
That's not just my ministry, it's their ministry. And the biggest blessing for being a director, a leader, is having their full support into the ministry and making it their own.
Yeah, I was gonna say sometimes for a leader, for someone in your position, more important than a team behind you that supports you is your family just being all in with you.
Correct.
I was recently going through, I'm still going through certain decisions and stuff that I need to make, and I reached out to you for advice, and something that really impacted me and I took from is when you were going to take the position to be the youth director at Elevate.
Yeah.
At the time, you were mentioning that you were talking to your wife and you told her, "Babe, I don't know. This is going to be a financial hit."
Correct.
And what you told me that she said to you was like, it didn't shock me, but I really took it. She said, I know you're called to this. Do it. We'll figure it out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How did that help you?
Yeah, that helped me tremendously because, it's one of the things that we think about as a family, especially as husbands, as fathers, being part of what you say, a provider, protector, priest. Being a provider is one of the biggest things biggest responsibilities that God has given to us. Yeah. So, having that support and I'm grateful for Elevate. Elevate, God has used Elevate to provide for our needs financially, thank God that we've been able to work out to be good stewards of our income. That I believe that's very important. No matter how much money you make, you need to be a good steward of your income. Yeah. We read stories of millionaires, right? One of them is Adrian Peterson, the running back from the Vikings. He made at one point, he had $100 million contract. And in a span of, I don't know, I think it was like 6-7 years, he lost it all.
Wow.
It's like, man, that's a lot of money to lose. Like, how do you waste that much money?
I didn't even know that.
So it's good to understand that no matter how much money you do make, you need to be good stewards. So that's something that me and my wife, me and Ruthie really prayed about. Yeah. We really talked about. And that's what, she knew from the beginning, ever since I was 16 years old at our church, La Roca back then, in a very small church. She knew I had a calling for this, and she knew that this was something that even though I tried to avoid for so many years, and then I finally started to answer, she was like, "Babe, look, God's provided for us all this time. What's to say that he's going to stop providing now, especially if this is what he wants you to go after and pursue and the call that he has for you? How is he not going to provide for you?" Yeah. So really grateful for her, truly. Baby, I love you. I truly do. And I'm truly grateful for her and our family for being able to help me see the call that God has for my life.
Awesome. And just to round out, kind of like getting to know you a little bit, what are your hobbies look like? You're a husband, you're a father, you're a youth director. Do you have any time to sliver out some hobbies?
So hobbies, I don't have. I really don't know what to call it. Like a subject for hobbies. Like I don't. It's not like playing cards or all that stuff. It's more. My hobbies are people. My hobbies is who I like. Going to the pool is a hobby for me, as long as I'm with friends and family. Going to fish, you know what I mean? Like if any opportunity I get to hang out with somebody, I consider that
It's less what you do, more of the company you keep.
Correct. And I love that. I love to have people over my house. I love to have, every time we plan things, it's like, man, let's go ahead and bring in as many people as we possibly can. And my wife, she kindly reminds me, babe, remember we have a 2-bedroom apartment and we can't, and it's not that she doesn't want to. She loves it as much as I do, but we just can't fit 25 people in our house. It's like, let's try to settle meeting at a park or something like that, and let's do that. But those are more my hobbies. It's just I'm down to do, just about anything, hang out anywhere, as long as I get to hang out with friends and family.
Well, talking about that, just to tell you now, because I remember it now, and my wife has been on top of me about it, and every time she tells me I forget.
Yeah.
She's trying to plan sometime to come over.
Let's go, man. Come on,
just letting you know.
Let's stop putting it on hold and let's just make it happen, man.
Right. So we got to know you a little bit, and they got to know you a little bit.
Yeah.
This is who John is, a person that loves the Lord, loves people, and just wants to do the will of God and what He has planned for his life. And in my opinion, I don't know about you, but does it with excellence. Yeah. He really does it with excellence. I remember when I met John, he was the leader of a youth group. It was, it had a couple people, but I distinctly remember at the point where it got down to 2 students.
Yeah.
And he led those 2 students with the same excellence that he's leading. Whatever you're part of the numbers. 160 students sometimes on a Friday night.
I think that was our highest number. Or?
Yeah, at one point. Right now we're averaging roughly 130.
140.
Yeah, 130, 140 roughly.
Yeah.
So
what was yesterday 140?
Yeah, yesterday was
139.
139.
Technically, we could say 140, but technically, specifically,
we
139.
missed one,
One of them didn't check in.
So that's just, guys, anybody that may be listening, any guy, any leader, lead with excellence wherever you're at, and John really is a testament to that. And obviously, none of us get the glory. At the end of the day, the glory is the Lord's. But I like to honor, just honor people where it's when it's due. And really, John really has, obviously, in the Lord's strength, taken that role very well. So part of that, something that I also think John does very well, is that he thinks about things. Like you think and you consider and you like to study things. That's you're going to school ultimately for pastorship. So you consider things. And today's topic is obviously very close to your heart. I guess we can call it who is a Gen Z.
Correct.
So just to set that, who is Gen Z? We're going to talk about this generation, the young generation that is existence now, what they're going through, and in my opinion, why they would be so attacked. Do I want to say the word attacked?
Say misunderstood.
Misunderstood.
If anything.
Misunderstood, and it's interesting to me to see the progress of the deconstruction of from one generation to the next. I don't know if you've said this, but I'm pretty sure Pastor Lewis has said this, where you have one generation where church is mandatory, the following one church is optional, but at some point that keeps going to there's no church. So a family where at one generation it was a Christian family that loved the Lord, we went to church every Sunday and that had to happen, doesn't matter how you feel, ends up being a family that is completely unchurched at some point down that generation. So we're seeing in our country, we're getting to that generation where, and we're going to hit some numbers later, we have kids saying they're atheists without knowing what that even means.
Correct.
So, who is Gen Z? Gen Z is born between 1997 and 2012, so anyone between the ages of 12 and 27. I just cusp not being in Gen Z. I was born in 1994. The second youngest generation, Gen Alpha, is the youngest. So What are some things that we should know about this generation, John? You're in it. You're in the trenches when it comes to this topic. What are some things we should know?
So as you can see, Rudy, since this generation is the one born between 1997 and 2012, this is the first generation that's been born into a digital world.
Yeah.
Right. We know that they are ingrained in everything that it's digital. They are the most connected generation. We know that they embrace social media more than any other generation. It's funny because back in our day, well, I would say more in me and Gordo's day, but it was MySpace. Like MySpace was the thing, right? We talked to a lot of Gen Zers and Gen Alphas, and they're like, "What?" Either Gen Zers, they see it as like floppy disk, right?
Yeah.
They don't sure they don't even know what that is. Yeah. But back then, that's what kicked it off.
What music you had on your homepage? And
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, there's a trend. I don't know if you've seen it. There's a trend now where they get like a millennial and a Gen Z, and they ask them, "Oh, how do you answer the phone? Like, if you were gonna like act out answering your phone," and the millennial would do this, the Gen Z does this.
Oh, snap.
To answer the phone, and it's different. It's different. How do you roll down your window? The millennial would do this, and the Gen Z would do hit the button.
Yeah, I still got rolled up windows.
Yeah. So it's funny because there was a research study. I forgot from where, but the highest generation that uses Facebook is the Boomer generation and Gen X. Between more Boomer than anything. Then as far as Instagram, it would be more Gen X, some millennial, and then Gen Z is very, very hot with TikTok, Snapchat, what is it, X now?
X,
It's no longer Twitter. I'm not sure how that happened, but I'm sure that's for another podcast. But you could tell that they embrace social media. That's where they get most of their information. That's where they get most of their worldview. Sure. Right, is through social media.
Okay, so very, very social, but it's interesting because in your notes, you know, you have different points here. I by the way, love the way you do your notes.
Oh, I appreciate that.
This is awesome.
I learned from Pastor Lewis.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Shout out, Pastor Lewis. Thank you, brother.
They're so organized. I'm gonna be honest. I'm used to like not having them this organized.
It's too organized. It's too structured
for me. But I want to get to this point, to be honest.
No, that's okay.
You have different points here. First post-Christian generation, so less religious than any other religion.
And if I could share with that a little bit, back to what you were talking about, a lot of that has to do with previous generations just not prioritizing this one thing. And I'm sure you shared it in your podcast where the family unit isn't as prioritized as it was back in 40s, 50s, 60s, where the boomer generation had a very heavy emphasis on sitting at the table, having good gospel conversations, discipleship opportunities within the family unit. Yeah. We believe in our church that discipleship starts at home. Yeah. Parents are the main disciple makers of their children. They're the biggest influencers of their kids, whether they believe that or not, or whether they see that or not. So in the same way that the family unit has been not as prioritized going down the generations, so has the importance of things like coming to church on Sundays, praying to God, before meals and before bedtime, and just having personal devotions to God, which has brought us to this point where they are the first post-Christian generation. I forgot where it was posted, but what that means, it's about 4% of all Gen Z is a Christian, basically. Wow. Or at least self-proclaimed legitimate Christian. Yeah. So it goes to show how far they come, where what does that look like? Well, they're less likely to read the Bible. Mm-hmm. They look at the Bible more as a historical book, than actually a book filled with life, right? The Bible is alive, active. It's a double-edged sword. Few of them also have genuine Christian friends.
Yeah.
You know, we see that on Fridays. Fridays services, we're blessed because a lot of our students are actually outreach students. What does that mean? That means our current students that go to our Fridays, they actually go and outreach to our students at their schools, at their friends in schools, and they invite them to church. But a lot of them have few genuine Christian friends at school. And since they don't usually have real Christian friends, where do they draw their conclusions? Where do they find their conclusions about Christianity? They go back to social media. They're the most connected generation. They're going through TikTok. They're going through Instagram. You know, they're going through all of these other things. They're going through Snapchat. And then that's where they draw their ideology of what Christianity is. That's why I usually tell people whenever they share any sort of TikTok to me about anybody preaching or whatnot, I tell them funnily but true, I don't get my theology from social media. I don't get my theology from TikTok.
Yeah.
And it was funny that you were saying that many will claim atheism. They don't know what that is. And it's true because the more you talk to them about their atheistic views, it's more of agnostic view where they do believe in something. They do believe that there is, some sort of created being, but that it's simply just not the God of the Bible. It's not Jesus Christ, right? So the difficult part about this generation is that they don't know about God. They don't care about knowing him, and they don't know if it's really worth trying to even find out.
Yeah, and I want to go back a little bit to what you said because just being in the space of youth ministry,
Correct.
I've met multiple youth leaders and youth pastors, and I'm sure you know this. You're involved in the community, of the different churches in the area, but is just what comes with it. A lot of youth pastors in the area that view Elevate Church and view at what you're doing as like leaders in the space. So when they find out that I know you personally, they always ask, how does he do it? How does he? I'm like, dude, I don't know, bro. I know for sure that his preaching is gospel centered and he's not like trying to be fluffy about it. But a question I had for you is maybe it's unintentional. Maybe you guys haven't done this on purpose, but why do you think you guys have had a students group that is so willing to outreach? Like you said, this isn't in our notes, but it's a question that came up when you said it, because the kids their age, middle school to high school, the whole thing is, they don't outreach. What do you think in Elevate Students you've had such a students that outreach, basically?
So one thing I have noticed from our students ministry, at least the ones that are heavy on outreach, they have gospel-centered parents. From what I've seen, they have parents that are ingrained into our community. They serve on Sundays. Some of them even serve on Fridays, and we praise God for that. We want parents to serve on Fridays. We want parents to know that student ministry Fridays isn't just a time where you just drop off your son or your daughter and just go on a date night. That's great. That's not a bad thing. But at the same time, again, there is a generation of students there that you can show them examples of what godly parenting looks like, and discipleship opportunities. So to answer your question, I think honestly, when you look at the root of it, their desire for outreach is because, one, they have a love for Jesus. When I've shared yesterday's sermon, they're loving God with all their heart, all their soul, all their mind, and they're loving their neighbor as themselves. So that has given them a drive. And one of the things I do share here is that they are the most purpose-driven generation. So if you share with them the vision and the purpose of why outreach is important, well, because God has called us to make disciples of all nations. Yeah. God has called us to proclaim the gospel to our creation. And when you give them such a purpose as that, they're going to go for it. Yeah. They're going to go for it. I don't want to skip my notes, but they're the least committed generation, but they are also the most committed generation.
Yes.
And I'll expand on that a little bit later.
Good. So I love that. And it's interesting that we were talking about how they're so connected socially on social media,
Correct.
but they also desire community, which is why they seek, I guess, community on social media.
Yes.
But it's very interesting because the first note under this you wrote is they're the loneliest generation.
Correct.
Can you dive into that a little bit? How can a generation be so connected through social media but also be so lonely?
Yeah, so I got that quote from Shane Pruitt. We went to a training sometime last year, a next gen conference, and in this conference he was talking about how his generation is the most connected generation, yet they're the most loneliest, and it kind of makes you kind of just put a question mark emoji above your head.
He always drops gems, by the way.
You know, he
Shane
is.
Pruitt
He is.
Always.
Always.
Dropping gems. You know who
Always.
Shane Pruitt is?
No.
He shares them on Instagram. You're not on social media. He's it, bro.
Whatever that generation is.
Yeah, no,
Gems.
he's great. He's great. He has a lot of pretty great books that you can read on leadership and stuff like that.
Shane Pruitt, we want you on the.
Come through, brother. Come through.
We want you on the show.
So he shares how they're the loneliest generation. Why is that? Well, a lot of the reasons why Gen Z is so interconnected in social media, and a lot of times we do this too, is we try to find meaning, right? We see a post from a friend that's, I don't know, at Disney, right? And you're like, man, you're getting serious FOMO right now. Or you see another friend taking pictures of them going around the world, and you're like, man, like, I'm really missing out on life. And, you know, it can bring up a lot of feelings like envy and everything like that. And then comes loneliness, like, man, I'm really alone. I can connect with all these people online, but there's no in-person community that they can establish. And one of the things that I really love about our church is that we have done such an amazing job of filling in that gap for this specific generation. Because remember, this generation is not just the students that come on Fridays, is also a lot of the young adults that go in on our Tuesdays. We have a Tuesday service for young adults. Huge shout out to Juan and Diana. They're amazing, phenomenal leaders. We absolutely love them. And I know the young adults are just crazy about them, and for good reasons. But they have done such a phenomenal job to provide a service for young adults to come in on Tuesdays, and it just really shows on Fridays and Tuesdays that this generation is desiring for a community, and for us to provide them a in-person community that can move them away from the social media aspect of it, but they could actually have conversations one-on-one. You can tell that's something that they're really craving about, right? So that's one of the biggest issues that's been really plaguing this generation. Actually, they're actually called iGen. A lot of people call them iGen because it's a generation that is always on their smartphones. They're always. It's not. I don't even call it mobile phones because we don't use mobile phones since the Razor flip phone, right? But they use their smartphones, and the more they engage statistically on their phones, actually the more anxiety goes up because of just all the things that they're missing out on. It's like, man, I'm wasting my life. Man, look at this person. He just graduated from FIU. Man, I'm really missing out on all of these things. And a desire for relationships, it's really a struggle for them to cultivate that. And that's what I believe we have done a great job on providing for them. And the cool thing about this generation, they're not afraid of the hard questions. I've had students come up to me and ask me some questions where I'm like, yeah, I don't think I would have asked this if I was your age. And not because it was a bad question, but it was just because a lot of them are deep theological questions, and a lot of them are really personal questions. But it just shows that they're desiring to have those question answers, and they're inviting questions like, injustice, identity, the meaning of life. They want to know, because whether you believe it or not, if we're not going to disciple them, if mom and dad at home isn't discipling them, somebody else is going to disciple them. The public school system is going to disciple them. The government is going to disciple them. The social media is going to disciple them. The news outlets are going to disciple them. So while they're getting this world view, right, they're getting cultivated into believing something, but then we want them to understand who Jesus is, but we're not sharing them a biblical worldview.
Yeah, and I'm not. I mean, I've said this I think on the show before. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, like lizard people around the world.
Yeah, you are.
A little bit, but it's interesting because we have a generation, like you said, that they were born into social media. They're from their memory, there wasn't ever a time that they didn't have a smartphone.
Correct.
Or they didn't have social media. And it's interesting because when I was young, when we were young, we had a time where your social media wasn't a thing, a smartphone wasn't a thing. You didn't have a phone in your pocket the whole time.
Yeah.
So you had to talk to people. You had to interact with
It's the
people.
only way to get to know anything.
Exactly. And at a young age, you learned how to speak to people, how to cultivate friendships and relationships. And then for us, it was much later down the line that we were introduced into phones and smartphones. We have a generation that never went through that process. So they're always like this.
Because that's who they go to when they have questions.
Either when they have questions, when they're bored.
Yeah.
Boredom doesn't exist. There's somebody in the space of like authorship and creativity. I don't remember who this person is. I just remember the quote that boredom produces the best forms of art. Like boredom is one of the best things for people. And I think in the space of manhood is like boredom is the best thing for men. Because it gets your brain thinking and you come up with the best ideas when you allow yourself to be bored. And you're able to create friendships, you're able to expand your mind. And I think that's one thing this generation never went through a process where they didn't have a phone.
They just had constant entertainment.
They just had constant entertainment and a constant way out
Yeah.
to I feel uncomfortable in this space. I know I should talk to people, but I'm gonna go over to my phone. Talking to people is more uncomfortable. It's easier to come to my phone. Even now I'm guilty about it too sometimes, where my son is bored and he cries because he's bored. So in my that instant gratification of I don't want to hear him cry because it's annoying. Here's the phone to shut him up.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to let the kid be bored, right? Don't give him the phone. Don't teach him that the answer to his boredom is a device. And I think that a device, a video game, like we've said here before, bro, we got nothing against video games. I love video games as much as the next guy. In its proper priority and in its proper context. But I think that we live in a generation where the media, the phone, the video games, the TV, that has become it. Like you're a weirdo if you don't have that. And at some level of it, I think it's on purpose. Somewhere in this culture and in this space we live in, I think it's on purpose somewhere. Hey, if we want to control these people, let's not let them build relationships. Let's make them super unhealthy, super inactive. And one of the best ways that has happened, it's been a computer in your pocket.
Well,
Yeah.
like,
Giving you...
when Rome was like starting its collapse, what'd they do?
What did they do? I don't know.
Oh, they restarted.
They what?
They restarted the gladiator games and stuff. They
Really?
gave
Oh, yeah.
attractions to the people so they wouldn't really notice the downfall. Of the
give 'em
economy
entertainment.
and all that. Yeah, like let them fight and then they'll ignore it.
Correct.
Insane. So, wow, I was gonna say something and I completely forgot. It's your fault, Gordo.
When in Rome,
It's okay, man. It's okay.
It's fine. It's no worries.
if you can't remember, it wasn't that important.
It's probably irrelevant.
Obviously, yeah, I guess. And I guess that leads to this kind of like next point. Social media. What gets click is this like highly controversial something. You know what I mean? Highly vocal, highly controversial, like person, right? And I guess that has created in them a highly vocal generation about their principles.
Correct.
So you know, they welcome, like you have here in your notes, they welcome diversity and, you know, all this stuff. What does that look like? What in your studies? What do you think that has looked like, them being highly vocal about their principles?
So when it comes to that, a lot of times we think that the only thing that this generation cares about is just like diversity and not walking on eggshells and, you know, all these other things. But there's actually some good things that they actually do love and support. One is loving orphans.
Yeah.
They love some of the things that we as Christians love too, loving widows, which that's biblical, right? Loving the poor. And also their biggest thing that at least I've noticed from the context of my ministry has been matching your actions to words.
Your integrity.
Right?
Yeah.
So exactly. So, you know, this generation doesn't care about how much you know. I can continue going to school, pursue my master's in Christian ministry. I can go ahead and get a doctorate. I could write all the books that you can think of, right? As difficult as that may be, they really, not that they don't care about that, they just don't value that.
Yeah.
What do they care about? They care about, you know, beside the sermon that I preach on a Friday, what they care about more is me going outside, dribbling a basketball with them, and having gospel-centered conversations, having discipleship-centered conversations where it's like, man, how's your relationship with Jesus? Because now it brings that student, it's like, man, he's not just up on stage preaching a message. Now he's actually intentionally talking to me and interested about my walk with Christ.
Yeah.
Paul says in 1 Corinthians, knowledge makes arrogant, but love edifies.
Amen. Exactly. So I believe that this is a really good thing that we as millennials, right? We as millennials believe that, and other generations believe that. But I believe this generation really prioritizes that specific thing. Is like, hey, don't tell me how much you know. Show me how much you care.
Yeah.
I know I chopped up that phrase. I'm pretty sure it's another way or whatnot. There's 100 different ways, but it's basically that essence. It's important for you to know these things so you can disciple properly. But at the same time, what students care more about is how much you care about them.
Right.
Yeah. And then this is really just to get to know this generation, because there is something to do, right? At some point later, we're going to talk about, you know, how should the men of our generation respond to that. But this, in our process of getting to know this generation, to how to respond to them correctly, right? So we have basically two more points, kind of that'll encompass who this generation is. You know, not the greatest with communication or commitment, which is very interesting. What you wrote here. Yeah. Talk on that.
So it's funny because the more that I've done research, a lot of my research comes from Barna Group, Pew Research, Lifeway Research, you know, all these other great platforms to get this information. While they're the most connected generation, right? They have a smartphone. They literally have a phone where they could communicate all sorts of ways, not just audibly, but visually. They have video chat. They have Snapchat. They have, you know, you could text somebody on their phone, or you can message them directly on their social media platform. They have so many different ways of communication, but they're just not that great with communication. And it's strange. It's strange on how, and quite frankly, I don't exactly understand why. I don't know if it can just go back. Maybe they're just used to texting rather than audibly speaking. You know, going back to millennial, right? Instead of just like, you know, but funny. You know, it's one of those things that they're not the best at communicating or getting in contact with. Again, I'm not really sure as to why. If
maybe there's this disconnect, like this in personality. Like back in the day, when you communicate with somebody, when someone reached out to you, at some point you were going to see them in person. And I guess that level of like accountability of, hey man, why didn't you reach out to me?
Correct.
Maybe, but now since it really is a lot more impersonal, maybe this is my best guess. I don't know nothing.
It could also be just the amount of things that we have. Like it's crazy how advanced we've gone as a society that we just don't have time. Where I don't know, but back then people had time and things were a lot harder back then. You know, you didn't have washing machines, you didn't have dryers, you kind of just had to do everything manually. Yeah. But for some reason, there was time for family. There was time for study. There was time for having, bonding and building friendships and relationships and whatnot. So ironically, they are not the best at communication or commitment. They are. Go ahead.
No. So to talk about when you're talking about no time, I know why we don't have any time anymore. This week, so across this week, no, that's just today. I want the week. Thank you. This is me.
Yeah.
And me, that I know the dangers of social media. I don't like it. I've spent this week 15 hours and 15 minutes on Instagram.
Oh, wow.
30 hours on YouTube.
It's a full-time job.
That's a full-time job. And listen, my Bible app is all the way at 49 minutes, and it's still probably more than a lot of people.
Wow.
But 15 hours on Instagram, 49 minutes in my Bible app reading my Bible. Man, I've spent more time playing chess than I've spent reading the Bible. Right? This is why we don't have time. In a week, where could I be? Or what could my life look like if the 15 hours this week that I spent on Instagram were spent doing something else? The 30 hours that I spent on YouTube were spent doing something else.
Absolutely.
And this is my...
Could have written another book.
I could have written a whole other book. I could be done with the trilogy. And this is just me not having started my entire life on the phone.
Yeah.
God knows what this screen time breakdown looks like for a person in this generation.
Yeah.
That's why we don't have time anymore.
Absolutely.
We have the same amount of time, and we're putting it to these places. And I remember what I was going to say before when I forgot. The rise of anxiety, where you were talking about, like, anxiety has risen, depression has risen in this connected world. There's this study, again, what I hate is mentioning a study and forgetting
Correct.
who wrote it and where the study comes from. But the information is...
It's all right. They could Google it.
Yeah, they can. That says that humans weren't meant to be connected to so many people. Right now, because of the phone, we're connected to the entire billions of people that are on this earth. The human was only meant to be connected to, at most, 150 people and not have the same level of connection with all 150. Like, you had between 3 or 5 that you're really close with, that you care for, that, like, that really deep connection. And then aside from that, there was a group of like 12 people that you're friends with. You're not as deep, but you're friends with. Then a certain circle of acquaintance. Then a certain circle of, at max, it was in total 150 people of different levels of connection. Now we're connected to the entire world. But at the same time, we have 0 people within that, like, deep connection with. Everyone is a friend. And I think that has been the biggest contributor to the rise of a lot of these issues of anxiety and depression and the mental health stuff that honestly has been a rise now. I think that's one of the biggest contributors, the amount of connection we have with a lot of people. But moving on into that last point that you have there, mission-minded. And I guess that's a good thing that this culture has made popular, that purpose, that mission-mindedness. You reference a study here. Go ahead and...
Yeah, so this study, I got it from the Barna Group, one of the references that I've been sharing today. It's about 82% of Christian teens say that sharing their faith is important.
Yeah.
It goes back. It goes back to our students ministry. Why we have so many outreach students, meaning students where they were invited from one of their friends from school, right? So 82% of them, they believe that sharing their faith is of absolute importance, which is amazing, amazing. And even more so, almost 80% have talked to somebody about God in the last year.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's huge for a generation that we plague by saying they're not committed. They're, they walk on eggshells. They do all these things, just all the negatives that we portray on this generation negatively. Man, they are very, very much mission minded. And if we can direct them and guide them as a church, as godly men, they will move.
Yeah.
They will move. They will respond accordingly and answer God's call to proclaim the gospel to all creation.
Yeah. And then, talking about that, that's a perfect segue. Tell me you're a preacher without telling me you're a preacher. You're good at moving on to the next point.
Sure.
How then should men, the men of our generation and older, lead the younger generation? Because, there's ways to do it and there's ways to do it. But what is the effective way, that a man that has kids, but then also is part of a community, that the younger generation is part of that community? How should men lead a younger generation?
What I love about this generation is that they made it easy for men like us.
Yeah.
They made it super simple, bro. One of the things that this generation loves is they desire mentorship. You'll notice that there was a point in time before our young adults ministry had kicked off. Where were the majority of our young adults ministry on Friday nights?
Students?
No.
Where?
They were in our men's group and our women's group. Yeah. Remember that? When Juan was leading the men's and women's were
running out of room?
It was gigantic. We almost had to give them the chapel.
We split it. We had to split it into two different times.
Exactly. It was huge. Yeah. They desire mentorship. And the thing was that back then when we were in our, at least from my context, when we were in our generation, a lot of people our age were looking for advice from people the same age with the same life experiences that we had, instead of going up a generation. And this generation does a phenomenal job. Yeah. Super easy, man. It's cake. Yeah. Because they will come to you. They desire growth. I was listening to the Next Gen podcast by Shane Pruitt, and he was sharing. He had a person that had invited him. They had a person that they had invited, and he shared his testimony. There was a student that came up to him, to one of them, and said, "Hey, I want to join your men's life group," and they were like, "Oh, like why?" He said, "Well, I plan to get married. I want to pop the question, and you've been married. You've popped the question, and you can help me answer that question. Not my friend who's going through the same life experiences that I'm currently going through, right? So they desire mentorship. What I believe is the perfect model is no better than the biblical model, which is the Paul and Timothy approach. We know that Paul in his I believe it was his second missionary, his first or second missionary journey, as he had gone through his missionary journey, he had taken in Timothy to just bring him along in his journey. We love to complicate discipleship, but it is so simple. It's literally, what is God doing in your life? And as you can see that and you can share that, bring in that person to show them how God is working in your life as an example. And that's what Paul did with Timothy. And to kind of share just my experiences in La Roca, for those of you that don't know, I was an outreach teen. My parents are phenomenal. They're great parents. They just need Jesus. That's really it. They're their parents that they need Christ. And I pray for them still. But I was an outreach student. My parents, aren't Christian. And my best friend, who is a Christian, who was a PK pastor's kid, he's still a pastor's kid, or a pastor's adult, right?
Pastor's
I don't really know what to call that anymore. I'll stick with PK. But he was for like 4 straight years just inviting me to church. He was like, "Hey, John, you gotta come to church. You gotta trust in Jesus." And one day I came and I saw what the church really looked like. That it was a group of broken people that desired a relationship with a perfect Savior, and they took me in, and I believe God used the church to bring me at the foot of the cross, to trust in Jesus. And I remember just seeing what godly men really look like, and while I was very involved in my youth ministry, whenever it came to wanting to grow as a godly man, I relied on the deacons of the church. I relied on the 40-year-old men, the 50-year-old men, the late 30-year-old men, and I was like, man, I want to be that kind of father. I want to be that kind of husband. And they taught me practical things like how to change the tire of my car, how to change my oil, how to break a wall, and how to patch it, how to paint, all that stuff. And those are practical things that I was able to learn. But all that goes to show that these men also taught me how prayer is effective, how prayer is important, how reading your Bible is as a necessity for your growth as a Christian.
Yeah.
So I would say to the men listening to this podcast is the best thing you can do is be present.
Yeah.
Be available. I had a student come and talk to me yesterday. We had a good conversation, and man, I love this student so much. His dad had passed away when he was younger, and I believe when he was in maybe 4 or 5 years old.
Okay.
And he just never had a fatherly presence in his life. And he was asking me like, John, I want to be like my dad. I remember like snippets of my father, but it's like, how can I be a good father? Because he sees me with my girls and everything. And I told him, listen, be present. Just be there. That's the most important thing. But don't just be there physically. Be there mentally. Be there spiritually. Be there, be fully present. Don't just be there and just be on your phone, but actually like be intentional, have conversations, provoke them into thinking, right? And that's what I would say more than anything. Another thing is that they desire purpose. I already shared this in the beginning. They're the most purpose-driven generation. Out of all the generations, they desire purpose more than anything. Why is salvation important? We need to give them the why to everything.
Yeah.
Why is salvation important? Why is sanctification important? Why is proclaiming the gospel important? Because if you don't give them a purpose, they're not going to bite. That's why they're the least committed generation, because they're not going to do things just because you tell them because I say so,
right,
or because that's the thing that everybody does and you should be doing it too. They're challenging that concept. It's no longer yes, sir. It's more like why.
Yeah.
And while that seems rude to some people, it's actually true. You need to give the why to the what. It's what I was talking about yesterday when diving into our new series into Revelation. This church at Ephesus, they did all the right things. They did all the Christian things. They just never kept Jesus as the main thing. They abandoned the love that they first had for Christ.
They abandoned the why.
They abandoned the why.
Doing the stuff without the why.
Correct. So, every time, whenever I share, for example, yesterday when I made the call for students to serve, well, why should I be serving? Well, God has called you to it. God has called you to love your neighbor as yourself. And one of the greatest ways you can love your neighbor is to serve your neighbor through serving the church, and a lot of times they can, from hindsight, they could see things as meaningless. They could see how setting up a basketball court can really seem meaningless. Like there's really no purpose behind it. Setting up a football field can seem not really purpose driven, but the fact of the matter is there is a purpose behind everything we're doing. They just need to know that. So for example, why do we set up a basketball court? Ultimately, to provide gospel opportunities, to provide discipleship opportunities where we can dribble a ball with them, and whether we ball them up or not, that doesn't matter. What matters is after the game, we can have a conversation. Hey man, what'd you think about the sermon today? How's your relationship with Christ? That would not be possible had a basketball court not been present. We can find other ways, of course, but we believe in radical hospitality with intentional discipleship, with rides along perfectly with our church's mission statement: connect, grow, and serve. We connect people to Christ, we grow in Christ, and we serve Christ.
Yeah. And even the fact that they see older men, for example, playing basketball, that care enough to take the time, instead of showing up on a Friday, either John preaching a sermon, or Gordo in the tech. But then when you're done, you either leave because you got more important things to do, or you're talking to the other grown-ups. You know, you see a man that takes the time to, hey, let me spend this time with you. Let me enjoy the simple fact of just enjoying this game with you. Let me be here. And in that day, maybe in the context of what happened, you can't ask the question. They leave too fast, something happened. You can't really get into the conversation. But they do know, and they did see, that this guy cared enough for me to play this game with me.
Absolutely.
To spend this time with me. To have fun with me in this moment. Because I know there's a lot of Christians out there that would have something against certain aspect. Oh, why do you guys need to play basketball? It's about the gospel. You shouldn't have basketball. You shouldn't have sports. It's about the gospel. You're just those kids are only coming to play basketball. They only show up to church. They're really not there for the gospel. You need to drive home the gospel.
Yeah.
They're here though. Where are they going to hear the gospel?